Chapter 141, Antony Catches a Break, Antony's POV. Antony had been surprised when Julia and Thad hauled him back to the infirmary, only for Cloelia to tell him that Hanyu had already gone home. When Julia dropped him off in his sitting room and there was no sign of the man, Antony had assumed, along with Julia, that Hanyu was napping. He'd even begun to look forward to crawling under the sheets with his sleeping offering, letting the day's sorrows be eased by Hanyu's warmth and squirming and snores. It had been a shock to see his precious man sprawled naked next to the bed, but Antony had thought he must just have tumbled to the floor in the midst of a nightmare. Poor Hanyu, Antony thought with a pang of sympathy. But we'll get him tucked back into bed, and I'll curl up with him, and maybe he'll put his arm around me. If he did that, well, it wouldn't save Titus, and it wouldn't tell me what to do about him and Marcus, but it would go a long way towards making me feel like everything might turn out all right after all. However, it seemed that this was Antony's nightmare. Rather than sitting up, sleep-rumpled and bleary-eyed, Hanyu started crawling. He slunk towards Antony, his movements slow and sinuous, the curves of his bare ass distractingly prominent. Even in the midst of his confusion, Antony had to remind himself not to stare. The movements seemed too controlled for Hanyu to just be dazed with sleep, but then why didn't he get up? Antony wasn't sure what he expected to happen when Hanyu reached him, but when soft, warm lips found his feet, he was startled enough that he had to clutch the door frame even harder to keep from recoiling instinctively. "My lord, please, I know I am not worthy, but I beg you to use this undeserving body," Hanyu murmured between kisses. "It is yours, and I submit it to you for your pleasure and discipline. Your servant will do anything to earn the honor of worshipping you in this way." It was hard to focus on Hanyu's priest talk when his voice was so choked and miserable. And was Hanyu trembling too, or was that just Antony's own legs wobbling violently under him, and... Antony tried to pull back so he wouldn't crash down on top of his attendant, but in the process one of his feet flew out uncontrollably. He hit the ground, Hanyu whimpered something he couldn't hear, and for just a moment Antony sat in the doorway, dazed. "Something has gone very wrong, I think." "Fucking weak legs, fucking..." His face was right over my feet when I dropped. "Shit, Hanyu, did I kick you? I'm sorry." The man didn't respond. He just stayed hunched over in a bow, small and humble and definitely trembling, and Antony began to suspect that he would not be able to go to bed for a while after all. "We were just fine a few hours ago. I can't turn my back for 10 fucking minutes." "All right." Antony breathed in, tried to clear his mind of his own exhaustion and misery so he could correctly handle whatever this was. "What's going on?" Hanyu's voice, when it came, was a scared little whisper that nearly brought tears to Antony's sore, cried-out eyes. "My body, my mind, my soul, every part of me is your plaything, my lord. I beg you to make use of me in any way that pleases you." "What the... Does he want me to drink from him again? Why is he being so intense about this? What does he mean, plaything?" "Your servant's body is prepared for your enjoyment," Hanyu faltered, and Antony barely restrained a horrified gasp as realization crashed into him. "There is no need to hold back. Please, put me in my place and make this unworthy slave feel your ownership." "Oh no! Oh fuck! He means..." The nudity, the crawling, and the worshipful little kisses all over Antony's feet suddenly seemed sinister rather than confusing. Why in the world did Hanyu think that now, after his first visit with his unresponsive baby brother, was the time to seduce him? Did I miss something?" Antony demanded. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, he realized how ridiculous they were. He'd made a blithering fool of himself the last time he'd seen Hanyu undressed, barely restraining himself from drooling on the floor. He'd yapped about loving him, and, most damningly of all, kissed Hanyu without asking. What conclusions was the poor man supposed to draw from that? Why shouldn't he believe that Antony would take what he wanted from Hanyu's body, with or without permission? And here he was, crying, shaking, offering himself up because he thought that if he didn't, Antony would help himself anyway. Oh, Hanyu, my precious man, I've treated you so badly. The young man's vulnerability suddenly felt unbearable, his nudity as appealing as an open wound. Hanyu was much bigger than Antony, but he seemed impossibly small and unprotected as he huddled naked on the floor. Heart aching, Antony began the agonizing process of taking off his shirt. It was such an inadequate gesture. As he undid buttons and ignored the screaming protests of his mending bones, Antony wished that he had a bigger shirt, a cloak, that he could wrap Hanyu up in his own skin rather than leaving him so exposed and unhappy. But finally, it was done, and he could drape the shirt over Hanyu's shaking shoulders. Hanyu flinched violently, cringing down into an even smaller, tighter bow at the touch. Antony could almost hear the crack of his own heart breaking at the sight. Oh no, oh Hanyu, what have I done? What had he done, come to that? Why was this happening now? Antony needed to get to the bottom of that if he was going to figure out how to begin making amends. Would you please sit up? He asked. Hanyu obeyed, clutching the too small shirt over his shoulders rather than wrapping it around his waist or spreading it over his lap. It looked ridiculous and inadequate, like all of Antony's other attempts to care for this man. Somehow, Hanyu seemed even smaller and more abject once he knelt up than he had with his face pressed against the floor. He was shaking so hard, and the torchlight made the tears flooding his cheeks shine. His chin gleamed and wobbled, his lips trembled, and he kept his head bowed and wouldn't meet Antony's gaze. He was the very picture of fearful misery. Antony took a few more deep breaths and tried to steady his voice so he could ask instead of wailing. Once he felt fairly confident in his ability to stay composed, he finally dared to speak. I just got back from sitting with my catatonic brother, and I'm a little slow on the uptake. Even slower than usual, I should say. So, can you please help me out by explaining why a few hours ago we were happy and back to normal, and now you're begging for sex you clearly don't want? Hanyu gasped, his hand jerking towards his clearly uninterested dick. My lord, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, this doesn't mean... I was referring to the trembling and weeping, actually. In truth, Antony had been studiously looking away from Hanyu's groin until the young man's movement had drawn his eye there. Hanyu, please, what's going on? Hanyu shifted uneasily on his knees. I didn't understand what it meant when you kissed me, my lord. Please forgive your stupid servant. I never would have called it a punishment if I'd realized. You were trying to tell me gently, and I was ungrateful for that kindness. It was very wrong of me. Of course it's a fucking kiss again. How long would it be before Antony could stop paying the price for that one moment of stupid, reckless desperation? No, I'm not the one paying the price. He's terrified. Who wouldn't be? He lives with a hideous monster that can do whatever it likes with him. His frail human body is no match for me, and he knows it. I never should have let him know how badly I want him. Of course it scared him. I have to make this right. Antony gulped down another unnecessary breath. All right, what did you think I was telling you gently? That I wanted sex? Now that you don't have Marcus to meet those needs anymore, it makes sense that you would use me for relief, my lord, Hanyu breathed, clutching the ridiculous shirt until his knuckles turned white. I'm stupid for not seeing it. You're not stupid. The remonstrance was a reflex now, and Antony could say it even as his mind turned white and empty with horror. This was even worse than he thought. When Hanyu said use me, it wasn't just slang. He really thought Antony saw it that way, saw him that way, as nothing more than some glorified... And you're not a fucking handkerchief, Hanyu! What the hell? Thank you, my lord. The young man actually sounded grateful, and that was somehow even worse than the fear. Somehow, I've made the most wonderful, amazing person in the world think that I see him as a disposable amusement, and I am never going to forgive myself. I've been trained, my lord, and will do anything to please you, anything, Hanyu continued tremulously. I can handle whatever you want. You don't have to be gentle or careful. I know I was a bad slave and made you angry, so please... I'm not angry. Fuck, he thinks I want to be rough with him, that I would intentionally hurt him in bed, not for our shared pleasure, but because I was upset with him. And even if I were, I wouldn't use sex to punish you, Hanyu. Fuck, that's sick. Hanyu bent lower over his knees, hiding his eyes. It wouldn't be a punishment. It would just be showing me my place, my lord. Sadistic sex is not your place, Antony gasped. Oh, wait, I know where this is coming from. I understand how my sex life with Marcus might have made it seem, but whenever we were rough with each other, it was because we'd agreed on that. Fuck, his relationship with Marcus must have been terrifying for someone who had never experienced any kind of roughness or pain play. Hanyu must have been so frightened at the idea of submitting himself to that sort of sex with no prior experience. Yes, my lord, and I'm offering myself, my lord, for anything you want. Hanyu bowed his head a little lower, spread his thighs a little wider, and shuddered. Antony's stomach churned. I agree. Of course I do. Not that you need me to agree, of course. I'm yours, but... The terrified groveling was unbearable. Antony needed to see his face, needed to make himself understood, needed his precious man to lift his head. When he spoke, that need was raw in his voice, and he couldn't control it. Hanyu, would you please look at me? The young man's head swept up, obedient as ever, and the sight of his face was worse than Antony could have imagined. He was pale, his forehead damp with sweat despite his lack of clothes, and his eyes, gods, his eyes! He looked so frightened, so desolate, as though he were pleading for mercy from a monster. Antony wouldn't have thought it was possible to feel worse than he already did, but somehow he managed it. I would never, ever force myself on you, he whispered, the words so meaningless in the face of Hanyu's suffering. The young man's spine straightened fractionally, and his brows drew together in irritation. My lord, please, I would never make you force me. I'm not as disobedient as that, I promise. Of course, he thinks if he doesn't go to my bed willingly, I'll drag him. That's what he's trying to avoid. Is this just an effort to gain some autonomy over the situation? Some way to make it his choice before I just take him? I did this. No, I didn't. Look, I know I kissed you without asking, and I'm sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am. It was the truest thing Antony thought he'd ever said. I got carried away because I was tired and drugged, and I couldn't talk, and I just wanted you to know how much I love you. That's not an excuse, I know. I'm sorry. I don't want you to think that if I ever get carried away again, I would never, Hanyu. Not when I'm upset, not when I'm blood drunk, never. I know you don't have any reason to believe me, but I swear it's true. Love? The interruption was so faint and tremulous, Antony almost missed it and continued his frantic rambling. When he looked, though, Hanyu was finally staring him full in the face. The man's eyes were wide, and he was quivering even harder than before, but there was a wondering note in his voice that made Antony's full heart leap with a sudden treacherous flash of hope that... No, I already told him I loved him when I first apologized for the kiss. And before that, I told him I was his. And just today I said I would do anything to make him happy. He knows how I feel." The hope was dimmed by a quick stab of paranoia. Could this all be an act? A game? Did Hanyu want him to humiliate himself with endless tortured confessions just so he could laugh at him? Don't be ridiculous. This is Hanyu. He doesn't have a cruel drop of blood in his veins. And even if that was what he was doing, well, when I said anything, I meant it. If watching me pour my heart out again and again is what will make him happy, fine, I'll do it. Anything he wants. Doesn't mean I'll be happy about it, though. Hanyu, how many times will I have to tell you I'm in love with you before you believe me? The young man stared at him, his eyes going wider and wider, his mouth gaping. There was a shine in his eyes, a blush rising to his tear-stained cheeks that set Antony's traitor heart hoping harder than ever. Maybe once more?" Hanyu whispered. Please don't let this be a joke." Antony leaned forward and hoped that his face showed his earnestness, though in reality he was probably scowling. "I love you, Hanyu. Your kindness, your generosity, your curiosity, your smile. Fuck, I'm addicted to your smile. When I thought I couldn't save you, it felt like the end of the world. My world. You've changed everything about my world. You saved me just by existing. Of course I'm in love with you." Hanyu's eyes only grew wider, more transfixed as Antony made his stumbling, fumbling little speech. Tears poured down his cheeks, and his lips formed a word, but no sound emerged. Even so, Antony's shriveled old husk of a heart leapt at the sight. He was almost sure the mute word had been his name, his real name, no titles. "That doesn't mean I'm asking for sex," he said, emboldened. "I'm not asking for anything, just to know you. It doesn't feel adequate to say that that's enough. It's far more than enough. Just being near you is the greatest gift I've been given in centuries. When you talk to me, when you let me fix your hair, when you let me share your bed." "It's your bed." Hanyu's voice was barely more than a whisper. "I'm yours. I'm not meant to be loved." "Don't be stupid! Fuck! Sorry, you're the most lovable person I know. No one could possibly help loving you." Was this still about what Marcus had said about Hanyu being a parasite? How deeply had that one barb embedded itself? Or was it me? Of course it was me. What have I ever done that would make Hanyu feel loved? After a few months of the way I've treated him, no wonder his faith in himself is so shaken. Hanyu was shaking his head, but his eyes were still alight, awed, and Antony almost dared to believe it, joyous. Why would you feel this way when everything, every part of me is already yours? "I didn't exactly decide to fall in love with you," Antony grumbled. Shit, why was he grumbling? This was the worst possible time. "I just did. I love you." "Antony." It wasn't a cry or a squeal this time, just a soft, worshipful breath, just his name. I could never deserve, after everything, I never." Hanyu pulled in a shuddering breath, let out a sob, and smiled. His eyes and nose were red, tears and snot were all over his face, and it was the most beautiful smile Antony had ever seen in his life. "I love you too." His precious man sagged forward against his chest, and Antony barely managed to put his arms up around him, he was so astonished. It was impossible. It was too good to be true. This had to be a trick, a dream, some kind of spell that pretended to give you what you most wanted and least deserved. There was no way. But then Hanyu sobbed noisily into his bandages, and all Antony could think to say was, "Good crying?" Hanyu laughed, nodded, sobbed again, clutched him. Antony breathed deeply, taking in the scent of his hair, still tinged with rank fear sweat, and adjusted the shirt around Hanyu's shoulders. Well, he cleared his throat to beat down a sob of his own. That's all right, then. His precious man clung to him even tighter until Antony's still battered body seemed ready to scream in protest. Instead, he gathered all his courage, all his daring, and pressed his lips to Hanyu's head, right next to the severe-looking bun that had replaced his braid crown. The first kiss was tentative, barely more than a ginger touch. When Hanyu didn't protest, though, Antony dared to kiss him again, harder, fervent. I love you, he repeated pathetically. It felt as if he could never manage to say it enough times to truly convey what he felt. But Hanyu was warm and soft and real in his arms, and for the moment, it was enough.